Hello Year 12. Today I'm going to be talking you through how to answer about child language acquisition in your exam. And child language acquisition is one of the subjects that you could write about in your Year 12 mock exam. So just a reminder here, child language acquisition is one of the 4 topic areas, 3 of which will appear on your A-level paper. It's Component 1, Section B, and those are the 4 areas: language and power, child language acquisition, standard and non-standard English, and language and situation. So 3 of those, the first 3, will appear on your mock exam paper, so you can decide which of those you would like to answer on. In all of the language issues essays, they start in the same way. There'll be a short text which is given to you as a starting point for developing an argument or a discussion, and that is an important part of this essay. They do want you to be able to show that you can develop an argument based on the knowledge that you have. So you'll need to know about the stages of child language acquisition: phonological, lexical, grammatical, and pragmatic. You'll also need to know about the theories of child language acquisition: the behaviourist theories with Skinner, cognitive with Piaget, Nativist, Chomsky, interactive, Bruner and Vygotski, and of course the critical period with Lenneberg. If you're not sure what any of those are, then have a look at the previous lesson that we did, which goes through all of those theories. Also, you'll need to know about the features of and the importance of child-directed speech. And if you're not sure about that, there's a previous lesson on child-directed speech too that you can go back and review. So this is the exam question that we're going to practice today, and it gives a short extract. Now, this is actually an extract about research, but you might also be given an extract which is a child speaking to an adult, which gives some examples of the sorts of language that you can expect that adults and children use when speaking to each other. But this actually gives something from research. So it starts off talking about research at the University of Washington and Connecticut examined thousands of 30-second snippets of verbal exchanges between parents and babies. What our analysis shows is that the prevalence of baby talk in one-on-one conversations with children is linked to better language development. So this is the point that they're making, that there's a direct link between the input that a child has and their language development in later life. And this is your question. Using the quotation as a starting point, assess the importance of the input of caregivers in the process of child language acquisition. And the bits that are underlined there, those are the important things. They want you to assess the importance. So that means giving an opinion about how important the input of caregivers is. And as we know from our debates, there is some difference of opinion about how important that is. This is an essay plan for that essay, and we're going to go through each of those paragraphs together. So the first one is an introduction where you refer back to the quotation and also think about what caregiver input is and how you could assess its importance. How would you know if it made a difference? Do the outcomes of children actually vary according to the input, as the quotation would suggest? Then, in your second paragraph, describe some of the features of child-directed speech. And again, you can have a look at a previous lesson that we did on that, all of the features that are there. And if you can, break those features down into the different aspects of it: phonological, lexical, grammatical, pragmatic. Then have a look at theorists in your third section, and then have a look at then do a conclusion where you look back at the original question. So we're going to go through these one at a time. So in your introduction, as the same with all of your issues essays, you're thinking about the argument that's been put forward by the quotation or the text that you've been given. And you can refer to theorists in this as well. So, for example, Clarke Stewart in 1973 found that children whose mothers talk more have larger vocabularies, and also just things like the NHS, which encourages parents to speak regularly to their children because it promotes bonding as well as language development. So there's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that parental input makes a big difference. You can also look at there is a difference in the input that children are given and the output that they have, and that there may be a social aspect to that too. So your introduction is really referring back to the quotation, unpicking what that quotation is saying, and if you can, providing some evidence about it. So it might look something like this. Here's some sentence starters. Researchers into child language acquisition disagree about the importance of adult interaction. The extract suggests that this input is an important factor, or the extract emphasises that, or the input that caregivers to young children is discussed in this extract. Okay, there's a little typo there. The input that caregivers give to young children is discussed in this extract. Okay, your second paragraph then. So in this one, you're going to describe child-directed speech. You're going to look at the different aspects of it. And on the next slide, I'll show you how that might look. So you're doing a sort of point evidence explain, quite a simple point. But so think about caregivers modify their phonology when speaking to children. See if you can find an example of that. For example, they may use exaggerated intonation. Now, when I say find an example, quote something that a caregiver might say. It doesn't have to be something that you've heard, but it's an example of the sorts of things that happen. And then what the impact might be on child language acquisition. And go through some of the features of child language acquisition, some of the features of child-directed speech and how they make an impact on child language acquisition. Your third section is about the theorists. So as we know, theorists disagree about the importance of child-directed speech. So for Bruner, it was very important, and he developed this idea of the language acquisition support system. And he thought that the way that we modify and change our language was vital for enabling children to develop language so rapidly. Vygotski also looked at the way in which parents scaffold the way that they speak to children, which enables them to develop into the next stage of language acquisition. Skinner, with his operant conditioning and his behaviourist theory, he thought that input was important because he thought children were copying and that they were given rewards for things that they did well. And you can find some examples of how that is true as well, with things like social words, please and thank you, and vocabulary building. Genie, who had no input, developed very little language, and so that shows perhaps that language was important. And you can go back, you haven't mentioned it already, about Clarke Stewart and how parent speech has an impact on child vocabulary. So making a point about this, I've just given you this slide here that shows how you can express that. So for example, Bruner, the name of the theorist, developed the social interactionist theory. So if you can say what type of theory it was, that helps. That emphasised the importance of parental input in child language acquisition. He described a language acquisition support system, which enables children to access language and make rapid progress. These features, such as recasting and repeating a child's utterances, might be described as child-directed speech. He believed that. But there are theories that give a different emphasis on child language acquisition. Pinker and Chomsky, for example, with what was called the language acquisition device. The Nativists, they believed that children have an inbuilt ability to acquire language, and they have some evidence that children are not just copying what they hear. So, for example, the overgeneralisation in grammar, and you can give some examples of that, like rund, the way that they are resistant to being corrected, and this shows the language acquisition device is working, that they are using the regular grammatical rules, they have an ability to interpret, and they are overgeneralizing them. You might also look at the poor quality of input. Children actually hear a lot of fragmented sentences when we know that spontaneous speech is not fluent and not always grammatically correct. The idea of universal grammar, that grammar is that children learn in the same stages, in the same ways throughout all cultures. And also that some cultures, not very many, but there are some cultures that don't use child-directed speech at all, and the children still learn language. You can also use the idea of Genie for this theory too. The idea of the critical period is developed through working with Genie, that the language acquisition device kind of turns off over a certain age, and that was why Genie was never able to develop language despite intensive therapy when she was rescued. So, for example, Chomsky's nativist theory of child language acquisition proposes a different emphasis. And it's important to say that neither of these theorists on that spectrum completely discount what the other has said. Chomsky didn't think that input wasn't important at all, and equally Bruner didn't think that there wasn't some genetic predisposition to learn language, but it was an emphasis on which one was most important. So when you're writing your essay, that's what you need to be thinking about, is your assessment of the importance of parental input. So in your conclusion, go back to what the question asked you, which was to assess the importance of the input of caregivers and give an opinion based on the evidence that you've seen and discussed. Okay, so what I'd like you to have a go at doing is to write this essay. Spend about an hour on it, and then you can send it to your teacher to be looked at. This is one of the topics that you can revise and that you can write about in your exam. Okay, thank you very much.